I want to wish everybody a warm welcome wherever you are. Here in the US is a holiday called Memorial Day. And I was thinking, because as I was driving to get coffee this morning, they were talking about the meaning of the holiday, which is to commemorate the soldiers that have fallen, have died defending the United States. And I thought, well, I'm going to put another meaning to today, which is that everyone that's fallen from some violence around the world, and it's bigger than just soldiers who are fighting. It's, you know, so the atrocities that we all are facing day to day, and the needless deaths. So I want to just put aside some time today to just really sit with that. And I don't know what it means, and just know that there's only what I can only do what I can do, and hopefully as other communities we join each other, because there's something about doing this together I think would make more meaning, and to maybe help counteract what we are all facing today. So I just
exactly, I believe 100%.
So we're not alone in this, and in this community, there's something we can do. So I just had to say something about that.
Right.
So I'm really grateful that Joan's here this morning and graced us with her presence. And I know the topic is around Gene's stories, and many of us have spent many years with Gene when he was alive. We were fortunate, and we all have made meaning out of what our relationship has been with him. And maybe I'll have a chance to share that later, but I feel like what our organization is doing is actually making Gene's dream alive, which is that he would always say to me, Melinda, you know, it's not enough just to be focusing with each other, you know, you've got to get it in existing structures. And that's what's sort of what we're doing daily. And I think that we have actually been quite successful, that some major organizations like the United Nations and War Child and other organizations are learning about what learning that focusing is something, and putting meaning behind that. So I'm really excited that we're doing that, and thinking about the next generation and how that can be carried forward. And that's sort of where we are now. But I'm really grateful that Joan is here with us, and absolutely delighted to be in her presence. So welcome everybody, and welcome Joan.
Thank you so much, Melinda.
I want to say also a very warm welcome to everybody, and I'm so pleased to have Joan and to be reflecting together on Memorial Day somehow on Gene's legacy, and on who Gene was as a person, as well as who he was as a teacher and thinker and incredible creator. And this reflecting together is something that we've really developed over the 2 years that this Help the Helpers has been, you know, going on. And it's just so wonderful to have Joan with us, reflecting with us, and offering a long history with Gene. And Joan has done so much to bring Gene's work and focusing into the world of psychology, and into the world of helping in general. And of course, I have to say, Joan is most wonderful friend and focusing partner. And Joan and I have been focusing together for years, and it's such a special part of my life. So, Joan, you're going to share with us some memories and reflections, and then we're all going to participate with you in thinking of Gene and focusing and the gift of what we have from that legacy today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm going to start by taking you back some 40 odd years, when I met Gene Gendlin quite by accident. The situation was, I was sitting in a library in Cambridge, Massachusetts, trying to finish my doctoral dissertation. And I'm sure you have the experience when you're trying to work on something, everything else suddenly becomes more interesting, right? Because it's so hard to stay with one topic for such a long time. And I was sitting in the library and a random book was on my desk. And so I, of course, decided to read it instead of working on my dissertation. And the book was The Creation of Meaning by Gene Gendlin. I don't usually read philosophy, but I picked up the book and I began to read it. And I was fascinated. He was talking about the edge of awareness, where language emerges from non-language. And we go back and forth between what was verbalized and what was not yet articulated. And in that process of going back and forth, something new emerges. So a couple of weeks later, by sheer coincidence, or maybe now I'm thinking divine intervention, I received in the mail a flyer from Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado, describing a program of studying meditation and Tai Chi. And in it was said that Gene Gendlin was coming for a week to teach something called focusing. On a whim, I signed up and I went. So now it's 2 months later, and I am sitting in the audience of probably 150 people, and Gene is teaching us focusing. And I had just finished graduate school. Everything I was hearing from him felt quite new to me. He said things like, noticing what you're carrying inside, but don't greet it, but don't fall into it. Right? And then he said, what the issue you're dealing with right now has many parts, but see if you can be with the whole of it. Right? And then the famous line, see if there's a word, a phrase, an image, or a gesture that would capture what you're holding right now. Already I felt like, wow, this was something I knew I wanted more of. Nothing in graduate school had approached what I was learning in those few minutes with Gene. And that week that he was there, he kind of took me, right after the talk, I was stunned. And so I sat in my seat as everybody filed out of the auditorium. And Gene came over to me, and I was very shy. I would not have lined up to say hello to him. And he said, I can see this really speaks to you. And I said, how did you know? He said, you were nodding and you were smiling. And I could tell that this was very important for you. And I said, it is. And I'm so happy to finally meet you. And he invited me to join him for coffee with other people. And the whole week, I felt like he was kind of taking me under his wing, which was so special. And at the end of the week, where I had several chances to practice focusing and learn something about the philosophy underneath it, from which it sprung, I said to him, Gene, I'm so sorry you're in Chicago. I would so much want to study more and learn from you and have you supervise me. And I had just begun seeing clients and just begun teaching at Lesley University. And he said, well, I'm coming to New York for a 2-year sabbatical. Anytime you come down from Boston, I'll be glad to meet with you and to supervise you. But that was a life-changing moment for me. And then when every other Friday, I made my way down from Boston to New York, and I met with Gene. And I remember very clearly the very first time we were meeting in his apartment, which was something he had rented, and it was over the river. And so it was this incredible view. But when I walked in, we were meeting across a coffee table, and it was piled with papers and books, as a professor would normally have, right? And he said, wait a minute. And he took a couple of minutes to clear everything off so that he and I, there was nothing between us as we sat. And I later chuckled when I read his quote, put nothing between you and the client, because I saw that not only did he mean that metaphorically, he meant it quite literally. He was clearing the space. And of course, there was a message in that, wasn't there, right? You are more important than all of this right now, and you're going to be my focus, right? And then the second or third time I came, he said, "I'm so glad you're here. I've been waiting for you to come in order to focus." And I felt a little bit of anxiety, and he was wonderful at reading faces. He immediately saw the performance anxiety on my face, and he said, "Oh, no, no, no. I don't need you to do anything. I just need your presence. Just need you to listen." And then he focused, and he said some of it out loud and some of it to himself. And I remember that was the first time I was aware of what we now call the Gene sigh. Right. He was very famous for that. And he, we both shared a little bit. Oh, there's that, and I need to be with that, and that one's like that. So he was, sharing a little bit of his process, and then he said, "I think I'm good till tonight." So that was a whole big teaching for me. Number one, my competence in skill in leading him and focusing was not what was required or is ever required. It was the quality of my presence, right? And presence is both a being and a doing, right? And that he just wanted my full attention, right? The other thing I learned from that was it's important before you go into a meeting or work with a supervisee or a client that you clear your own space, that you take time to be with yourself so you can fully be with the other person. And that's been an important teaching for me before every session. Even if I have to keep the client waiting for a couple of minutes, I make sure that I am fully present so that there's a space for their experience to fall into in me. I'm not preoccupied. But the other thing he showed me in that moment was when he said, "I'm good, I guess, until tonight," was that he, besides being a brilliant theoretician and clinician, he was a human being who was struggling, and that he needed frequently to focus himself in order to be okay with everything around him, right? So I wanted to share with you something about the quality of Gene's presence, his presence, because some of you who have either watched him do demos in person or on YouTube, we're so grateful to have those recorded, see that he had a kind of a presence that when he was with you, nothing else existed. He was fully present. And you could feel his trust in the life forward direction, that he knew that if he were with you in the right way and you could turn friendly attention to yourself, little steps would come of their own accord. It's like you didn't have to do anything. You just had to be with it in a certain way, and life would flow. Steps would come, right? So I felt that with him personally. I watched it with other people he worked with. And I also saw it when he taught focusing. I must have seen him dozens and dozens of times present at conferences, at workshops. I would always try and fly around the country to be there when he was presenting because I knew there was something new to learn. And there was something new to learn because he always used fresh language and fresh metaphors for whatever he was trying to express, because he was so present in the moment. So to give you an example, as some of you know, when you're teaching focusing, one of the challenging things to teach is how to help people have the right distance from whatever their issues are, right? So that they don't get overwhelmed. And Gene had so many ways, I noticed, of helping people get that distance. So one way was he would say, "So there's your discomfort there. So there's your discomfort, and there's you, and there's me, and we're just going to camp out together and just be with it and just keep it company," right? And another way he would say was, "So you're finding there's an anxious place there, right? But let's not be the anxious place. Let's have the anxious place. Let's have it next to us and keep it company," right? Another way he would say that is, "Let's keep dancing distance with it." And he would lean back like this, and stick his arms out. We don't want it to breathe down our neck and overwhelm us. So let's keep it at dancing distance, right? And I think my favorite image that I've used myself with other people because it was so effective for me was when he said, you know, you don't have to stick your head in the soup in order to smell it. You can back up and just get a whiff of it. You want to be at whiffing distance to your issues. So creative and so present. So what else did I want to share with you?
Oh, I love those images, Joan.
Do you have one about the way he helped people to create distance? Does one come for you, Lynn?
Actually, no, I'm so in the ones you
Okay.
presented. Just each one feels so precious and wonderful, and the spirit in which it comes, and that whole way of being with another person, that you're making a relationship with the it. Almost like when you were telling it to us, I'm feeling it freshly and saying, oh yes, I want to be that. I want to be that in my life.
So one of the things that I want to share with you, which some of you know already, is how humble and unconventional Gene was. You know, people were surprised to find he was a smoker, and we had to always plan events. Some of Belinda will certainly remember this, around Gene taking smoking breaks outside. Right? And, you know, so that was always part of the planning of how we would do everything, because otherwise he would say, I need to go have a smoking break, right? But he was also a very unconventional dresser. Gene didn't care about appearances, and he never cared about looking professional. I see Carolyn Worthing nodding about this. Yeah, so I remember once he was going to stay at my house because he was going to present the next day in Boston to a very large group. And I noticed he was in bad need of a haircut. And so I said, Gene, would it be okay if we just kind of trimmed your hair a bit? And he just threw a towel around his neck and he said, sure, whatever works, it's fine. And then the next day when we went to the event, I noticed he was dressed in his usual flannel shirt, and I don't remember whether it was dungarees or sweatpants. And I remember when we got to the event, the manager said, if your presenter wants to change into his presenting clothes, there's a room he can go to. And I remember ironically saying, my presenter is in his presenting clothes, right? And when we got there, of course, everybody loved it, that he was not having airs of any sort. He was just his absolute authentic self, and people just loved him for that. Gina, Lynn, I know you said you had a story about Gene and his unconventional dressing.
Yes, I think my story didn't end up quite as well. I had arranged Gene to talk to a large group of psychoanalysts, and he came with his white shirt with a big rip in it. And the psychoanalysts were like, what, you know? And I said something to Gene about the rip in his shirt, and he said, oh, it's good. It will make everybody feel at home. It will make everybody feel like we don't have to dress up for each other. But I don't think the psychoanalysts felt at home with it. But they loved him anyway, in spite of it.
Yeah. It was a statement.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
it was mattered. About
yes,
what really
the medium is the message, and yes, that was part of his message.
Another part of his message was the importance of the individual as opposed to the group, and that came from I'm sure his experience in being a survivor of the Nazis. And he always highly valued, he said, if the individual is not sacred, nothing is sacred. And I noticed that in a couple of ways. One way was whenever there was any kind of, whether it was in a casual meeting over dinner, or whether it was in a board meeting, or whether it was in a workshop he was leading, if anyone attacked another person, he would always stand up, put his hands up and said to the person who had a strong opinion, speak to me. Let's leave the other person in peace, but you speak to me, right? He wanted to hear from you, but he didn't want there to be this cross current of hostility or attack or criticism. Another way I think that we have as a legacy from Gene of his valuing the individual is his not wanting to have a protocol of how to teach focusing. Once you were certified as a trainer, he wanted everybody to have the freedom to find their own way to teach, right? That is so rare. I don't know another method that doesn't have levels or protocols or rules of how you teach it. And the reason he wanted that was because he felt like the vital life force in each person had to be there in their teaching. And so you had to have your own signature in that. And as a result today, we have as many different ways of teaching as we have teachers. And so people can actually find and gravitate towards the teacher that most reflects or resonates with them. That is thanks to Gene's prizing of the individual. People often wanted to know what Gene felt about spirituality, because most of us feel that focusing is a psycho-spiritual method. But Gene was very careful about his wording. He always said focusing was a doorway to something much, much larger. And he sometimes called, while he didn't use the word spiritual, he would talk about the great big everything that's outside that door, or the big system. You know, he had lots of words for it. And when I asked him once, why don't you use the word spiritual? He said, well, if we use the word spiritual, half the people will be totally with us, but half the people will think we're going to be chanting Om for the next hour and they'll be turned off. So he said and then he said something that reflects his humbleness. He said, there is something greater on the other side of the door of focusing, but when we get there, I'm not an expert. I'm just a consumer like everybody else. Or yes, I think he said, I'm a consumer like everybody else. I need this as much as anyone does, but I'm not going to talk about that part. So they're just so Gene-like, right? Another way his humbleness came out was often at conferences. Some of you will remember him saying this. He would be giving a talk. He always gave a little keynote. Often it was about philosophy. He wanted psychologists to understand philosophy better. But then he would always say, don't do focusing. And everyone would kind of look around the room, and then he would say, alone. Put it together with everything else that you already do. Focusing, he said, is like a motor, but you don't want to just rev your motor all day. You want to put it together with whatever else works for you, right? He was the anti-guru, right? He didn't want focusing or him to be seen as special. He wanted it to be integrated with everything. Melinda said earlier that he was interested in social transformation, and he would be so pleased with the work that she and Pat are doing. And I just want to underline that most of us know about Gene through his philosophy and through his therapy. But what was very important to Gene was to have focusing be a part of society in a way that would transform things for the better. He always said, you know, there are the political people, there are the spiritual people, and there are the psychology people, and they speak different languages. And he thought focusing could help one language, could help people find a way. He said that focusing helps with that all of those different people or groups want to have transformation and change. But most of them don't understand that change happens at a deeper level of inner attention. And so focusing knows how to get to that level of change by paying inner attention. And so he said he wanted us to bring focusing, all of us, to schools and to universities and to churches and synagogues and mosques. He wanted us to bring it to the UN. He wanted us to bring it to politics. He wanted us to bring it to prisons, right? And so a tiny example of how he thought this could happen is one that just occurs to me, which was that he thought in churches and synagogues, there's usually a coffee hour or an Oneg Shabbat or a time when people can interact. And he had this idea that instead of just chit chat on a superficial level, that people could be paired with another person and they could have just 10 minutes of listening to each other, right? Each person would listen to the other, what came up in the sermon or the service or how they were feeling that day, and to really make deeper listening contact with each other. And he thought that would transform things. He thought it was an antidote, that kind of listening, he knew was an antidote to alienation, was an antidote to isolation, was an antidote even in prisons to violence. And, I think that was the idea he had for political groups, for spiritual groups, for people to make a one-on-one contact where they could come to a deeper sense of inner change, and then also have whatever else they were having in that group. Melinda, is there something you wanted to add to that? Because that's so much the space you're working from.
I just feel like I carry him in my heart with everything we do. Some of you know I became a volunteer just for a local Afghan family. And the next thing I know, I'm working with the University of Massachusetts, and we're creating a program to support all the Afghan women that are here in the Pioneer Valley. And we collaborating with an organization at UMass called Center for International Education. And so focusing is being embedded in our work and just getting the women together and listening to them and what's going on for them. So it's just part of what we do.
I also feel his presence when I'm carrying it into the world. I also am starting with some colleagues a program for new refugees ages 15 to 24, and we're going to try and bring them Clearing a Space as a way. So yes, Gene's hand is on my back.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Right.
The community empowerment work that some of us have been doing is so much an attempt to bring focusing into the arena of community depolarization and the ability for people to have social, political conversations with each other that aren't just complete fiascos. I was thinking, I wanted to add to this, that when we were talking about Gene's unconventional way of dressing, that it was his personality and his way of making people at home, but it was also, I think, it was also a rebellion. It was also a protest. It was also a political statement. And in everything that he did, his social awareness and wanting real contact that was non-hierarchical. I think that non-hierarchical element of the therapist isn't any more cured and healed and healthy than the client. The therapist is bringing their more integrated selves to the situation, and wanting everyone to have a voice. And in a sense, he was bringing something of the 60s into, right? And focusing does that, brings that.
You're so right. I'm so glad you mentioned it in that way. I remember him saying he really did not want Focusing Institute to be a hierarchical organization. And several times he said, if they, after I'm gone, and he, by the way, he often would say after I'm gone, and he would go like this, like I'm just an immortal, you know, this is going to happen. It's no big deal. So he says, after I'm gone, if they tell you you have to teach focusing in a particular way, please go out in the hall, find some other people and start a new organization. Like, how radical is that? Right.
I do have to say something because I was quote unquote an employee of the Focusing Institute. I never felt that. I mean, he would call me and we would argue and discuss things, but I never felt like, you know, I've always felt we were on the same playing field, you know. And then when we decided to start Focusing Initiatives, you know, he wrote a glowing, you know, this is what I always wanted to do. Go do it. You know, he didn't feel at all that we were competing, that he just wanted it out in the world. And his generosity of spirit is what we need more of. You know, it's an attitude of abundance rather than, you know, there's not enough. But anyways, yeah.
Absolutely, Melinda. And another way that generosity came is he wanted Focusing to be given for free. Focusing doesn't belong to anybody, it belongs to everybody. And so he, you know, when he started the changes groups, when people exchange focusing and listening, he always said, everybody comes here to give something and to get something for themselves, right? That there was this sense of mutuality and spreading focusing as that, you know, in the way that people need to learn life-saving skills, they need to learn focusing. He felt it was an essential skill.
Can I just say one thing, Joan? It's David. Joan, we know each other from long ways.
Oh, yes. Hi, David. I was finding you. Yes.
I just want to say, I'm very moved by what you're saying, but what comes to my mind is how we just knew how to value the other. And it's extraordinary. And I used to sit in his classes and he did to me what he was doing to you. He'd look at you. Oh, he knew right away what you were feeling by the expressions on your face. He was incredible. But the other thing I want to add just quickly is that when he was teaching focusing at Changes in Chicago, he'd always ask, what's the most difficult about you're focusing on? It always abruptly shocked me when I'd have to look into what's the most difficult part of something. And that is quite unique to be asking oneself, what's the most, because we often want to avoid the most difficult part of something. I wanted to add that. It's all about, and lastly, it's just about, it's like, you know, it's a wonderful book called Transforming Loss, a Discovery Process. And that's what he's made focusing into. It's a discovery process of a language which you didn't know was there.
David, those words are precious to me. Thank you. I agree that he understood that focusing could penetrate our places that were stuck or hard or confused. And he really wanted us to be able to use it, not to avoid those places, but to really find a way in to befriend those places.
And right now we're into avoidance in a big way with social media, smoke, you name it. Everyone's avoiding, has always been avoiding, and he knew how to cut through those barriers.
To go underneath.
Underneath. However painful, pain is growth. Or growth is painful. and lastly, it's very, and he also would say it's slow. If it happens at all, it's very slow.
Yes, right.
That's all. Thank you, Joe.
Oh, thank you, David.
Thank you, David. I thought when you, David, were going to say that he would ask about what's hard, it reminded me of his always saying in groups, give me trouble. What's hard about what I'm saying? What doesn't make sense to you? And that was such a wonderful teaching for me, not to avoid people's criticism, but to go right there. And that's where the edge was in what people didn't like, didn't get, didn't agree with. that edge of disagreement where there's something new that comes there.
So we welcome hearing from anyone else with an experience of Gene that wants to share.
Or maybe an experience of anything that has been said so far.
I guess, yeah.
Ruth, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my words together, which is always a little difficult for me. And it has to do with words, that part of focusing where you name, let me just change the view on here, that you give a name to something. And I always felt that words were so much less than experience, and sort of ran away from it. But the whole process and focusing of naming, finding the word, letting it speak, and checking with that, created a whole new, for me, relationship with language. And I realized that's also sort of a creating of a new reality.
Ooh.
That comes from that languaging. And I'm still with the enormity of that. That really the naming of something creates, and it's, I've been involved in some study in esoteric Judaism, and feeling how much, talking about spirituality, Joan, you know, how, whether it was Meister Eckhart's work or Kabbalah or St. John of the Cross or whoever, that Gene was there in the larger all the time.
Yes.
So how much that still unfolds for me. Thank you. Thank you. The language and the creation of reality. So, thank you so much, Joan.
Yeah. You're reminding me that he always positioned his chair towards the end of his life, when he couldn't walk very much, to be in front of a big window looking at nature. And he often would make reference to that, you know, the big everything. I remember there was one time we were at a conference, and he and I both had to leave the day before the conference ended. And he generously offered to share a taxi with me to the airport. So we were together for about an hour. And he had just had a serious accident. He was on his way to Europe to give a lecture, and in a cab, and the cab had an accident. And he was in the hospital, and he was in a lot of pain, often for, I think, the rest of his life. Some of you might remember, you always had to have a cushion to sit on because of that accident. And he said in the taxi to me, in our taxi, do you want to know what I learned from this accident? And of course I did. And he said, that bigger everything is always there. Whatever else is going on personally for us, it's always there as a resource. Anybody else?
I just wanted to say there that what you're reminding me of, and Ruth is reminding me of, and David, that the way Gene made contact was with what he called the one in there. The one in there was always visible to him. He was always looking behind the explicit packaged to where the person was coming from, and that link to the larger. And so it was this feeling of being seen in the little one, and also being seen in that connection with the larger, which was quite extraordinary.
That perspective that he brought, that you could feel, you're right, that he trusted in the life forward direction, but he also trusted in the universe in some ways. There was
Right.
I think, Joan, that life forward direction was the trusting in the universe.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's
Right.
exactly, yes, well put. Thank you.
Mhm.
Ruth, I know at the end of his life, you went and talked to him about his origin story, if you will, right? And his religious, was there anything that you learned about his relationship to his religion or to spirituality, to Judaism or to spirituality that you would like to share with us?
Well, Lynn and I were with him a couple of times to discuss this. I think what's always stayed with me was Gene, after we had a session, Gene called to speak with us. He said, I just want to make sure you know that I know that, and what a relief it was that I am not responsible for God. Remember that, Lynn?
Yes,
I-
yes,
I-
yes.
Who I am, I'm not responsible, and that God will be okay whether whatever my relationship to God or the big thing. It was the first time I ever heard him use the word God, but whatever my relationship to this big thing, I'm not responsible for it. He said, I can't tell you what a relief that is for me.
Yes.
And that was not long before he passed. So,
And that he wanted to share his process with the two of you.
Yes, yes.
and I was shocked because we never really talked about Judaism, but he said prayers every night. He said before he went to bed, the prayers he had learned as a child in Hebrew. It was like, what? So that was really amazing. But he didn't want to be stuck in any of these religious, the limitations of it. But
Yes,
but
I
it was
heard him
part of
once.
him.
Yes, I heard him once say, I'm Jewish, but God isn't.
That's right. Right.
Yes. And the emphasis was on I'm thoroughly Jewish, or there was some adjective there. I am very Jewish or something, but God isn't.
Right.
Yeah, and I see Barbara would like to say something.
Wonderful.
Hi, Joan. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
It's so delightful to see you, Joan. It's been a while.
Ditto.
Thank you for all of your stories and sentiments and memories of Gene. I don't want to take too much time, but I want to say I'm one of the business people that came into the focusing world. And apparently there was something about that attracted a part of Gene that he shared with me over the course of a year of weekly meetings. I'm about a third of the way through finishing a work called Sundays with Gene.
Oh,
Inspired
wonderful.
only in name by Tuesdays with Maury, but it's about what he wanted from me, which was to accomplish all of his business-oriented projects. There were more than 15 of them. And I was with him for a year, and he called them his screams, because he screamed and screamed and screamed about them, said he, and nobody ever did anything. And it was a little bit hard because at the end of our year, I had personal reasons I had to break away, but he looked at me and he said, you never got anything done.
Oh.
That was a little hard, but it was very Gene. It's taken me 10 years. It's exactly 10 years this year. But one of his ideas that I held all this time was to get focusing, as Melinda said earlier, into school systems. And I've come up with a plan. I executed part of it. I've already been to the New Jersey Teachers Union Convention last year and found out that focusing is welcome. I'll go back this year to their convention with an exhibit table And I don't know about a workshop presentation, but I'm speaking up today because I had to take a break from all this to accompany my mother in the end of her life, which occurred in December. And I'm a little bit stuck right now, but the children focusing people have been very supportive, and I want to finish the writing and get the work out there. I eventually want to recruit some partners. I'm a little bit nervous because doing this alone has a certain comfort to it because I'm not beholden to anybody, but doing this alone has a certain panic to it because I don't have enough support. But what Gene inspired was dauntless courage and endless inspiration, and his brilliance, of course, that nothing was impossible.
Yes.
So I'm speaking up here, a little bit nervous, but there it is. And again, thank you so much for being here. And you all will know when I publish, and some of you will know before I publish because I'll be coming for comments.
Wonderful. That's great.
That's
I'm
wonderful.
so glad you shared that with us. And I would love to know the 15 projects. And I'm so happy to hear you're taking one of them and really manifesting it in the world. And I'm glad you're asking for support. I'm sure there are people here today who will be happy to connect with you. And maybe Melinda, you can help people make the connection to Barbara by putting her email in the chat.
My email's in the chat.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Well, Melinda, do you want us to move on to the next part?
Well, Lynn always senses if there's someone else that wants to say something. I'll look for Lynn.
Yes, and I often have the felt sense that there's someone else who is just about to get the courage to say something. So maybe we should see if that's right.
Well, okay. I might be
Yeah.
that someone else.
Good.
And my name is Jean. And hi, Joan. That was since
Hello.
2005.
Wow.
And as someone who came to this country in 93, and, you know, language was something, it was like often brings me up to my head. And my beloved teacher, John Wellwood, I went to his yearly retreat workshop, and the title is always The Healing Power of Unconditional Presence. And every single time he urges every one of us to learn focusing. And his teacher is Gene Gendlin and Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. So that's two combinations. And I started with John Wellwood 2001, and I was certified 2005 by Joan and Neil. I just want to say, you know, we talk about mindfulness and presence, but it's focusing technique. Well, if I can say technique, really kind of help us to land on something deep and something really feel at home. And as a therapist, you know, Eugene said, I'm not responsible for God. And I feel like take this huge responsibility lots of therapists carry, like, I am responsible for this person or even for this session. No, I'm just kind of witnessing and facilitating this process because this guest client is really, it's his or her show. And I just, you know, how my life kind of put together with this focusing is this. When I was 18, my first month of my first semester in college in China, in the library, I accidentally read this in Chinese version, existentialism. And there's a statement in Chinese, but it's so simple, I'm sure translate to English is the same. Is what is beauty? Beauty is distance. And I was like a bombshell in my 18-year-old mind. How could anybody make a statement about beauty with one word? So I carry this all my life. Again, it's focusing. It's like, distance from felt sense and distance. I mean, I can go on, and it's like, it's like Chinese cooking. We don't have all the spice. My goodness, all the spice. All we have just salt. That's it. Oil to start with, stir fry, and salt, because it's the right amount of salt that brings out the essence of the material. And I would say it's the right amount of distance to bring out that essential ingredients that's needed for the moment, for the process, for the healing. And the therapist is like, I love this ballroom dance. I used to be a ballroom dancer. I love this, dance. It's a partnership. We hold the space, we hold each other at proper distance. And so focusing really in a tangible way give me a handle to do that dance. I don't need to have a familiar dancing partner. I can dance just about with everybody. So it's I just feel so grateful to have found you, Joan. And because the way you teach is it's wonderful, and together with Neil at that time, and and no wonder there's enthusiasm in the world about this focusing in the community. I'm just immensely grateful. I just want to share that. Thank you for giving me a chance.
It's
I feel like you're
wonderful
inviting me.
to hear your story. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And you mentioned John Wellwood, and he was a part of my story too, because it was John Wellwood who invited Gene Gendlin to come to Naropa Institute, because he was integrating mindfulness and focusing, and he knew Gene was an important teacher at the University of Chicago for him, and he wanted more people to know focusing. And then John and I became close friends as a result of that time together.
Oh, it's lovely. And I'm also inspired to write, and John has published wonderful books, John Wellwood. This is what he said. He said, I have the intention, but I never know how my sentence will finish. He said, it's focusing process. He said, I focus when I write. And so it's always kind of freshing, energizing process, even though I'm in the unknown, but I also have this trust and faith, always forward movement, surprise myself, that surprises myself. And it's like, it's beauty to be in the unknown, because there's I feel held in this unknown.
Beautiful. And by the way, John Wellwood wrote a beautiful paper that maybe I can send the link to Christine and she can get it to people on comparing focusing and meditation. And even though the paper was written 40, 50 years ago, it still is full of insights and wisdom.
Please.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad that
Welcome to the Art Healing. I'm Dr. Halim.
I'm so glad that I had the felt sense of waiting for one more person. And I guess now it's time to go into our breakout rooms of 3 people.
And I would like to just do an introduction to the breakout room if I can.
Please.
So you have just heard my origin story of how I found focusing. And I want to invite you right now to take a moment to think about your story. So let's begin by taking a breath or two to connect to yourself. And bring yourself back to the first time that you connected to focusing or to Gene. And just remember who introduced you to focusing. Did you find it in his little book? The focusing book?
Gene, Mary Hendricks introduced me to focusing, and Gene. I mainly learned through Mary Hendricks.
Right. But we're going to have a chance to all just do a little internal thing, and then you're going to share in groups and people can really hear each other's stories. So just take another minute and see, did focusing come easily to you when you first knew it, or did you need to work at it? And then just sense inside for how has focusing shifted your relationship to yourself? Is the focusing attitude with you at times when you need it? And how has focusing affected your work with others as a helper? And so as you find the thread back to your story and where focusing has taken you in your own life, just take a moment to sense what's going to be important for you to share with the other two people in your small group. So we're so eager to hear what was important that you shared, that you want to share with the whole group about your origin story or what focusing has meant to you.
Or whatever came up for you.
Yes.
Was that me? Is that okay? So hi. So yeah, what I wanted to share, which feels really, really important, is because I feel like this is the most important thing about focusing. It was the most important thing about my story and what connected me to focusing, but it's also really feels important is that we talk a lot about what is of focusing and some about the how, but there's I find these chats so distracting. This my face. Nothing personal to anybody who's putting all the chats up, but we don't talk so much, and all this talk about Gene and all that he contributed. I just want to put these big exclamation marks that to me it's Gene the man, Gene the personality. It's how Gene would sit, how he sat with me. He did a day at our week-long. I guess in the old days he used to come for a day or two at the week-long, and he did that. And I was the volunteer that he sat with. His non-pretentious way of being is beautiful, but it's also his way of being so excited and enthusiastic about whatever was coming for me and making it okay. To me, that's something that we do with focusing, as those of us who are teachers, but also those of us who are focusing partners, are being with someone in a way that says that, listening in a way that whatever comes is welcome, and whatever comes is important. Whatever comes has a really good reason for being there. It's that so much permission. To me, that is the most valuable part of focusing. And of course, the embodied is important, and on and on. If we didn't have that way of being and welcoming the gems, it's all gems, even if it doesn't come out pretty, it's all a gem. And when we can be that way with someone, another human being, then they get to be that way with themselves, and then they get to be that way with other people. I think that, to me, is the most important part of focusing. Yeah, yes. Be able to give more and more of that away, because I think it would be a better world.
Right, right.
And I'm sitting in Jerusalem, where I have been woken up the last couple of nights by helicopters going around, and it's been pretty intense the last few days. Seems like today's quieter. Anyway, thank you. Appreciate having the opportunity to share that.
Yes, everything is in that big welcome.
It's just reminding me of when I'm teaching that we say, welcome what comes and be glad it spoke.
Yes, be glad it spoke.
And to protect it from any critical voices that come in to interrupt. And then the
Exactly.
last thing is you have to pay attention to any stirring that is arising. However slight it is, pay attention.
Mm. Yeah.
I would say yes. And I would go so far as to say those critical voices also have a good reason for showing up, and we can have that same attention toward them,
Mm.
which is a little bit different than what Gene said. But
That's
I've done a lot of work with the inner critic, given that was the main reason that brought me to focusing in the first place.
Right.
Was mine, but yeah, I'm still working with it. I mean, in teaching it.
Yeah. Lastly, and just to say, I put everything into a nurturing space. Whatever it is, you put it into a nurturing space. You can put it aside or put it on a train, but put it aside for a while. And then you get into focusing. But you got to have it, everything has to be nurtured.
Mm.
And may I add, it's very fascinating that even if I'm with something very difficult, how this difficult thing becomes its importance and has always a positive sense in it.
Yes.
That's a surprise for me every time I do it. It's always new.
Yeah.
I so agree with that what we think of as negative has this surprising newness that carries forward. It's the voices that we don't want to hear when we can make room for them, that show us a whole different dimension.
Mm.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I would like to suggest something to the Focusing Institute. I think it would be not very much work, but it would help many people, a kind of information database of what Gene said to individual people, or in workshops. Like, I think he said some things in workshops in Germany, and I have not seen or read any sources in English where he told that. So it would be interesting for people who work on something to know what did Gene say about something. And it would be, that would be a big text, maybe a chaotic text, but one could search for keywords, then that would help many people. For instance, I attended a workshop in Germany on dream work, and Gene answered the question, would it make sense to apply the dream work method also to real situations? And I don't know whether he said that anywhere else or anything about that. In this workshop, he said, yes, and I call that the Hungarian method, because I once sat in an airplane with a Hungarian next to him, and that Hungarian man asked the same question. But anyway, he answered that. So I think later, if I tell it now, it will become lost, or only you will hear it, or you will maybe tell others. But I would like a database for future generations where people can look up what did Gene say to people about that specific thing, maybe.
Yes, I love that idea.
That's great.
And that also is another way of getting the right distance with something. I'll often say to my clients, if this were a dream, how would it be for you?
Yeah, but what he meant was, I think what we meant in that workshop was to apply the dream questions, like
yes.
That idea of working with the idea of projection. You know, what's annoying about another people. Some people say what's annoying about other people is something in you, which I don't think is a very good idea, because another person can also be toxic, and it has nothing to do with you. But I think that was the background of that question.
Yeah, that's right. That if it were a dream is just the first part, but then applying some of those questions that you ask about a dream to
Yeah,
a
yeah.
situation can be very helpful.
Yeah.
One of the Geneisms that's just come to me as you're talking, Hans-Peter, is when I would tell him that I was going to do some research or start a conference, he would be enthusiastic, and then he would say, lean it forward, and he would say, but make sure you get something for yourself. And that idea, get something for yourself, is so Gene. It's like he knows that it takes a lot to do work, whether it's listening to people or starting a new project. And he wanted to make sure that you nourished yourself, because he knew that then you would have the vital energy to keep bringing it forward and not burn out. So that's a wonderful message from Gene that I'm passing on. Make sure you get something for yourself in whatever work you're doing.
Lynn, the time has gone so fast.
Oh my goodness. So do we have a poem of Dorothy? And we want to make the announcement that this session will be on YouTube and on our my channel, but also our new Focusing Psychotherapies channel that everybody needs to subscribe to and tell everybody else about. And an edited version will be on that. And this week I'm going to be talking about the joy of thinking from TAE point of view. And the week after, we're going to have Dana and Baruch talking about the field of prayer from Israel. And we would love everybody to come to that. And we'll be having a meeting on June 13th after Dana and Baruch speak to us about the summer and how we're going to hold the focusing space, the Helpers group in July and August, and also ideas for the fall. So I would love everybody to come to that meeting. That will be at 10 o'clock in 2 weeks. So Joan, thank you so much. I feel so renewed and inspired,
Well, so do I. And it was so wonderful to meet some new people and to really reconnect with faces that I've missed sometimes for decades. So thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so we're going to have our closing poem.
This poem is by David White. I happened to hear Sunday on being an interview with him and Krista Tippett, and I'm always happy to get reconnected with him. And before he read this piece on the interview, he says it was written almost like a conversation in the mirror, trying to remind myself what's first order. And we have so many allies in this world, including just the color blue in the sky, which we're not paying attention to, or the breeze, or the ground beneath our feet. And so this is an invitation to come out of abstraction and back into the world again. And I've read it before, but I love it so much. Everything is waiting for you. Your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone. Your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely, even you at times have felt the grand array, the swelling presence and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you courage. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentor of things to come. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you. And the tiny speaker in the phone is your dream ladder to divinity. The speaker in the phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing. Even as it pours you a drink, the cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. And the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything, everything, everything is waiting for you.
Oh, what a perfect poem to end this beautiful session. Thank you so much, Dorothy. We really appreciate that.